Hi there, I'm Sasha, creator, co-founder, and CEO of Coding Rooms here.
Hi, I'm Angela from Coding Rooms, and welcome back to our weekly podcast. So, on Ep.4 today, we have a great topic to talk about, which is personalized learning. But before we get into that, obviously, we'll start with our product updates, then get into kind of everything to do with personalized learning and a discussion around what it is, the technology behind it, and especially the challenges it faces in real world, right? Like adoption and the infrastructure, as well as how teachers have to adapt to this new way of teaching. And then obviously we'll end it with the thought of the day. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you with some of the key product updates this week.
Thanks for the intro, Angela. So this week we have quite a few more product updates than usual. We've got actually about five new big features that we've got coming out this week. The first is comments. So you'll be able to create comments on your students' code in real time. So in the same instructor dashboard, you'll be able to um, highlight a piece of code, right click to create a comment, type in any markdown formatted text, and then your students will immediately see the comment that you have for their code. This means that you no longer have to jump into a student's code and edit it. You can have a much more sort of a much more at least from a student perspective, a more sort of passive impact on their learning, which is good to support them as opposed to actually change what they're doing, which is a big point of feedback that we're addressing with this update. That'll go live within the next 2 days. Um, Next thing we're shipping out is updated conferencing. So we've had a lot of users talk about how conferencing is a really big part of how they use coding rooms, and so we're um, rolling out a new implementation of conferencing that's going to be a lot easier to use. Also more stable for users who are on a wide variety of browsers and laptops, and tablets. Um, and over time, we'll be adding more integration between conferencing and the code editing features as well. So this is kind of an on ramp for us in doing that. And that will be configurable. So you'll be able to use the current conferencing tooling until we reach full feature parity between the two. Initially, the new conferencing will not have full feature parity, but it will be the default option for new users. You can always go back, so we're not going to force that on anyone until there is full feature parity. The next thing is workspaces. So students will be able to create a workspace on coding rooms, and that will essentially enable coding rooms to be your go-to IDE without having to create classrooms for every assignment. So students will be able to use coding rooms entirely on their own time and manage how they create and share their work. And we'll use the same IDE that we have in the classroom, so your students don't have to learn different tools. They can just focus on learning and creating. That's also shipping out this week, and that leads us into another exciting new feature that we're releasing, which is a deeper auto grading support inside of the platform that will allow you to do things like create interactive homework assignments and get them auto graded from your students, and that will integrate with workspaces so that students can write all their assignments in their own workspace and then privately submit it to your auto grader on coding rooms that will all run in the same environment. So that reduces the chance that a student can write something that works on their laptop, let's say, and then doesn't work on your auto grader. We also plan in the future to support other integrations for the auto grading so that the students can write it on their own and submit, especially for larger projects, then submit them to the auto grader. Next, we've got the interactive input, and the migration away from the input tabs. For a long time, we've had the input tab as the way within the IDE as the way to pass input into your program, which, while logical from an auto grading perspective, because it doesn't require any interference during the runtime of a program, it is not that great for the learning use case and the teaching use case. So what we'll do is we'll continue to support this preloading of the program's input, but we will also support interactive execution. And the infrastructure that we're shipping for interactive execution is also going to allow a couple cool new things that we'll be releasing in the latter half of this week, as well as into next week. That should really, for a lot of users who up until now have had to use maybe coding rooms in addition to another IDE, I think can really help to close that feature gap. So that's all for the product updates this week. Back over to you, Angela.
Wow, so it's a lot of exciting new features getting released. That was a long product update.
Yeah,
it should be the whole podcast just feature. No, but we have a lot of exciting things coming up, as well as future launches. So be sure to follow us on all our social medias and check out our blog on our website for any new releases. But in terms of today's topic, it's really just discussing what personalized learning is. Now, personalized learning has been a really hot topic, especially in these recent years, as we start delving into this new way of teaching where all the sort of online e-learning systems are adaptive to the student's aptitude or learning pace. Now, this has proven through a lot of research and academic research, as well as studies, that it does show that it helps students in terms of learning. All students across all grades have shown an increase in their grades for different subjects, and it's definitely a proven concept. Now, with a proven concept comes a lot of challenges to actually implementing it in the real world. And obviously, I think you have a lot of experience in this industry, as well as just thoughts on it. So why don't you just kick it off and kind of discuss what is really personalized learning to you, and how do we here at Coding Rooms kind of define that space?
Sure. So definitely there's been a lot of exciting progress. It's worth noting that personalized learning, or sort of from a more technical perspective, known as intelligent tutoring systems, ITS, that you can do a deep dive into on maybe Google Scholar. If you look up these search terms, you can find a lot of great research on them. Have been around for a while. More recently, they have become sort of consumerized, productized, right, and commercialized in a meaningful way. And the goal with all of these systems is to provide what's known as an adaptive learning experience. And the goal of an adaptive learning experience is to, first of all, identify the level of a student, right, as quickly as possible. So sort of this placement, idea of placement is important to understand. So find where they are, and then to understand, given an exercise, where would they get, what would they learn, and then if we know what they need to learn, because we know where they are and we know what the goal is, what's the most effective effective question to show them at that time. And there's even exciting new potential there with like space learning, for example, where we can schedule and sequence content in a predictive way, or an adaptive way. And then there's also the idea of being able to actually create an ITS, intelligent tutoring system, that can be there alongside a student as they work through problems. And so that's kind of a bit of the overview where the industry's at, and some technical perspective on what it really means to be doing personalized learning. Of course, we don't mean personalized learning the way that a human tutor would do it, where we're kind of talking about how from a technical perspective, we can automate that, or a significant part of that.
Just more intelligent algorithms, right, to kind of read into student metrics and data.
Yeah, because the traditional way of learning, right, has been around for a while. There's a lot of exciting research around creating classrooms that are more engaging, more interactive, Definitely, COVID has kind of thrown a wrench into that whole space because we're now fully remote, so we can't do a lot of those things that otherwise would be more interactive, more engaging. Um, but that also begs the question of how do we do interactive, personalized learning when we're full remote or when we're mixed, socially distanced, whatever. That's another interesting space that, although sort of less well researched, is exciting, and not just because of where we are today, but also where kind of learning is headed. Um, there's also interesting potential around sort of asynchronous learning and the idea of sort of separating what we do in the classroom from what we do outside of the classroom. And I think that's particularly exciting for higher ed, maybe high school level students, right? Where a classroom is kind of classroom or seminar, however you want to call it, discussion, is is a place to focus on collaboration as opposed to learning in the traditional sense. It's like,
Yeah.
can we actually make education much more effective by focusing less on like what we would traditionally call learning, and focus it on the, maybe let's just say, the collaborative segment of learning.
Because I think that's more meaningful, right? It's a more meaningful use of in-person time. And especially I think it'll be interesting post-COVID to see why we're missing this aspect so much. I think people are quick to bash this whole remote learning,
Mhm.
but I think the technology has come a long way, right? Because without this whole fascination as well as investment into personalized learning, these online just platforms, then we would actually be in a rut right now.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be interesting to see when we go back into in-person learning, would the curriculums kind of adapt, because they're starting to see traditional based lectures like I can watch a YouTube video, or
Yeah.
there's so many MOOC platforms out there that can give me that kind of lecture style. And even some of our champion users have mentioned that they particularly like coding rooms because it's the collaborative aspect,
Yeah.
right? It's really learning from each other
Mhm.
and that kind of social aspect. Although we're an online software, but it promotes benefits
Yeah.
to communication.
Exactly. That's something that's so. This all kind of goes back to so the sort of legacy of learning, right? And the fact that people who lead learning are the folks who learned 20 years ago, and there's this sort of tendency um, to um, to continue the same practices, right? COVID has, of course, made that impossible in a lot of ways, to not even consider what online learning can offer or mixed learning can offer. Um, but I think it's almost a given now that we're not going to really ever go back to exactly what we were doing before. So we'll definitely get back into the classroom at some point, and that's crucial. It's crucial to be back collaborating.
Mm-hmm.
But are we going to be collaborating in the same way? And what tools are going to help us collaborate
Mm-hmm.
in the classroom? And what and this is really sort of what I like to call the sort of the third wave of learning technologies, right? We had the first wave, which was sort of really learning management systems, right? So can we get our grades into a system and have them reported and have my list of students and all these pretty boring admin tasks. Then we had MOOCs, so this whole idea of getting content online, getting it accessible and creating a more equitable learning environment globally, and it has been huge, right? That with a laptop and an internet plan, I can now watch MIT lectures, right?
Without
That's
paying like the
yeah,
hefty price tag
exactly,
of
for free without having to apply, right? So I conceivably could get the same level of learning now from anywhere that I can get on campus, which is different, right? That wasn't the case until platforms like edX and Coursera came out, and solved that problem. Now we're looking at the third wave of learning tools. Coding Rooms, of course, is a member of that category and a pioneer, I believe, in the coding segment of that computer science learning segment. Um, it has a lot to do with bringing technology into the actual learning workflow. So in real time, where the technology becomes a lever, a tool for the instructor, as opposed to a full replacement.
Like a substitute, yeah.
Yeah, as opposed to a full replacement, and also as opposed to just a management tool.
Yeah.
Right. That's a very it's different in a number of ways from the what the last, let's say, 2 decades of learning technologies have brought us. There's quite a bit of there has been a certain amount of innovation, especially in the lower end of K-12, like preschool type of stuff with iPad tooling and stuff. But it really is, a lot of them have been, you can kind of trace their roots back to bringing content online. So even it might be an interactive content experience, but it won't be teacher led. It's not a real multiplier for the teacher. Whereas with coding rooms, and I think what is happening right now in our industry with this third wave of learning technologies is you really you insert a teacher at the center of the system, right? So the instructor ultimately is the one who's
like
being,
the glue,
yeah,
like, you know,
exactly,
to the students, and also the tools. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you have a certain number of outputs that you're optimizing for, which of course is sort of student performance, teacher satisfaction, parent satisfaction. There are a lot of these sort of outputs that you're optimizing for. Your teacher is at the center. They're kind of the hub of the system, and your students are the spokes on the outside of the system. And you're creating a platform, or you're leveraging tools that in real time let you optimize for those outputs, right? Without just sort of plain vanilla content delivery, or in addition to plain vanilla sort of content delivery, which is an interesting space.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I mean, as we start going forward in this industry as well, we're going to have to start thinking and evaluating the infrastructure, and you know, teachers are learning, you know, as we're creating as well, right? They're trying to see how is this going to help us, and how am I going to fit it into our curriculum? And that is still, you know, still in its early stages, and teachers are still trying to figure out the balance between the two. But I think, to your point, it is inevitable that we're heading in this direction, because I mean, this whole pandemic has arguably accelerated this space by a number of years. I would go as far to say a number of years, because it really pushed us to that new way of thinking that, you know, being in person, we should really leverage that time valuably, right? What good does it do if everyone's just sitting there looking at a blackboard? Yeah,
exactly. That really hits at a couple of sort of interesting trends in learning, right? I mean, the first one is that if content is free, and if the world's best content is available in a great relevant format, what do I need you for, Mr. Teacher? Right. So there's there for a while, especially I think in higher ed, certain segments of higher ed, of course not sort of the real top tier higher ed in the US, but higher ed more broadly, there has been an identity crisis of what am I doing? Like, why am I here? And it's clear now that you're there to guide and facilitate the process, right? And that's your unique value add, because content really, for the most part, is there, right? So you're either kind of creating content on a massive scale, you're building MOOCs, or you're leveraging textbooks, MOOCs, to create a unique experience for your students that ultimately facilitates their learning, and can facilitate things like student to student knowledge transfer and collaborative learning. So this notion of the teacher as the central content delivery machine is outdated.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
It's sort of outdated and clearly sort of ineffective, right? I mean, you kind of have to look at this by grade level and whatnot, but generally, lecture format, live, no recordings, is not the best way. Right? It's not the most interactive, not the most high performing way to deliver knowledge to a wide group of people.
But we're starting to see that shift too, though, because I remember even a few years back, I mean, I have a couple of friends who were in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
and I think in contrast to the States, in Europe, at least in the UK, they were filming their lectures a while ago.
Yep.
So they already started filming their lectures like, hey, you can attend in person if you want that in person in the classroom experience,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm going to upload all my lectures online anyway.
Yep.
And then what becomes a value add is really attending those discussion sessions. So
Mm-hmm.
students end up being actually more inclined to attend those discussion sessions, listen and hear what other people's perspectives are. And that was their true value in college.
Exactly, exactly. And that requires a new approach to tooling, new approach to technology for learning, which has been traditionally dominated by the what I'd call it's like the management and the plain vanilla content delivery systems, um, and it's what we're working on, here at Coding Rooms. Uh, that's why it's so important, because there's really no more question about things like this anymore, um, and it's kind of our responsibility to create the technologies that help us through this transition, because we can't just do it today, right? And actually that was one of the big problems with going for remote all of a sudden, was that oops, we didn't actually have all the tools that we needed to effectively do this,
Yeah.
right? And then of course you can also look at the infrastructure question. So separate to sort of the pure technology aspects of personalized learning, you can also look at the tools required for personalized learning. So broadly speaking, that's a device like an iPad, or tablet, I should say, or a laptop, and an internet connection, right? That you can also say you need language, so you need the ability to actually interpret, but those are requirements, but they're not infrastructure requirements in the traditional
like
sense.
essentials. Yeah.
They're essential, but they're not something that can be delivered by a government, for example, or by an education a provider, right? And one of the things that the COVID crisis actually helped expose was the fact that a lot of students don't have devices at home, at least.
And that leads to actually our thought of the week. I mean, really, remote learning is a privilege because, we started to realize, like, when you're privileged, or when you're, don't have to worry about having technology devices, you never think about, like, hey, what are the people in my own country that have no devices? And it was only till COVID where it's like, I see there's, like, not just the fact that people don't have devices, but to your point about internet, people were trying to steal, Starbucks or Taco Bell internet because their internet was more powerful than their bandwidth at home. And you have, like, not just obviously the student or the kid trying to use the internet, but then you have your parents also conferencing, and it poses the question, like, hey, we have all these cool innovative tooling coming about, but then just even essential infrastructure still needs work and investment.
Yeah, that's a big concern. So we know a lot about personalized learning. We know, at least in some subject areas, how to do it. We know how we can train teachers to leverage these types of technologies. We know how to create environments that work. Um, None of that matters unless we have infrastructure. Um, and definitely one of the big challenges with deploying technology at a wide scale is having suitable infrastructure. And what we talked about before, devices and internet connections, are absolutely crucial. Without these, their students really don't stand a chance, I'd say, because that they're never going to be able to cross the start line, much less the finish line.
And it gets scarier as we continue down this path, which is more or less inevitable at this point. Because then, if a lot of teaching just really requires this kind of infrastructure and tooling, then what really happens to those students that get left behind, right?
Yeah, that's kind of the pessimistic view, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, sure, definitely. I mean, but it's definitely something that governments and policymakers have to consider. And
it's challenging with sort of managing the budget requirements and the capital expenditures of purchasing devices for large groups of people, large groups of especially students who do a few things better than break hardware and software. They're
Yeah,
fantastic at
that
that.
actually didn't even cross my mind, but that
Yeah.
it's true. Yeah, it's definitely
So
something to consider.
yeah, that's actually kind of a huge thing because not only do you have the upfront cost of purchasing licenses, of purchasing the physical hardware, but and purchasing infrastructure for campus-wide Wi-Fi and the internet bandwidth. You also have the long-term maintenance cost and also the upgrade cost because we'll get to a point where probably we're looking at maybe 5 years max sort of timeline for your devices, or at least the particular flavor of devices that you choose. So if you do a school-wide, let's say Chromebook deployment, you have a big question of, okay, how long is each device going to last, but then also how long is this class of devices going to last? And will I be able to adopt technology in 4 years that will still run well on this technology, right? Or this hardware, which is a really big question for especially for districts, schools, right? Um, how do we make sure that um, not only that we have the ability to get this infrastructure, but that it'll be long lasting. I hate to use the term sort of future proof, but at least future proof for a certain, where future is finite and on a
Where the
scale of
cost is
years.
justified, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
And there are a few things, I mean, frankly, right, when you look at especially when you look at the future, right? I mean, a lot of school budgets are dominated by things like campus infrastructure, like not talking internet, but purely buildings, water,
Right.
electricity, right? These are things that, frankly, are necessary, right? Could they maybe be like maybe not as big of a part of the budget, right? I mean, that's another big question of remote learning is maybe are there alternate ways to have a campus, right?
Mhm.
Those are big questions that I'm sure we won't have answers to for a while. They require some careful thinking, but they are worth considering. And then ultimately, um, uh, how do we make these decisions around technology budgets? Because there's few other things that I think are more pressing than that, and things like um, teacher pay, of course, but those are pretty I'd say hot button issues, right? Everyone kind of knows that we need to pay teachers more, um, or more, let's say more reasonable rates at a wide scale, because of course there are a lot of schools who pay teachers great salaries, right? But
Mhm.
it's not something that's really broadly enforced.
Yeah.
So you have that kind of opportunity gap, and a lot of that's geographic, and a lot of that's political. Anyways, but then this question of software and the infrastructure to run that software, so that your students can actually um, have a level playing field. So you have uh, equity, at least within a school, right? I mean, there's of course inequity between districts and between schools, but can we at least begin to solve those problems at a school-wide level
Mhm.
with let's say one-to-one devices, and then ultimately, do I have the infrastructure um, beyond that at school and also at home, which is now something that's interesting to consider, in order to make the investment worthwhile, because you definitely have this issue um, of the sort of I'd say that maybe the long tail of this budget, right? And in an odd way, right? You can actually make a huge investment in Chromebooks, but if your students take them home and they don't have Wi-Fi, they're not going to work, right? I mean, there's not going to be real value because Chromebook in the classroom is cool, but if I can't use it at home for my homework, now all of a sudden, maybe I won't have really great results with my new Chromebook program because my students aren't able to leverage um, my investment, right,
Yeah.
in one-for-one Chromebooks. So all of these things you really have to analyze from like a bigger picture, I mean, what we call in
Perspective.
software sort of like
Mhm.
systems approach, right?
Yeah.
Where each of these things is actually just a really small part of what is a broader question of efficient, equitable, and future proof education delivery.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, it really is just about how can we get education accessible and easy to use and adaptable in the classroom, which
Yeah,
are all big questions for
and
sure.
equitable, and equitable in
Yeah.
a meaningful way, right?
Yeah.
Because um, equity is kind of a again is like kind of politicized, kind of topical, um, but truly equitable means that at least at a school, at the very least at a school, everyone kind of starts on a level as level of a playing field as is um, realistically possible. Uh, Equity is also hard because equity might mean you have to do things that hold other students back,
Mm-hmm.
which is a very challenging question, right? And that's kind of part of what gets lost in a lot of the, um, let's say, short form content that you find on Twitter and whatnot. And it's part of why we have these discussions in a long form podcast
Mm-hmm.
where we can kind of talk about the nuances. But it is a fundamentally nuanced issue, right? Um, that this idea of equity and adaptive learning, the, sort of today's primary topic of discussion, is probably one of the most fantastic ways to put a meaningful dent in the equity problem. Um, but we have a lot of work to do to get there.
Yeah. So tune in on our product updates.
Yeah.
So every but we have a lot of exciting stuff coming up, and obviously stay with our social medias, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode on remote learning. And yeah, catch us next week. We're always on this time every week. So thanks. I'm Angela from Coding Rooms.
Hi, thanks. And I'm Sasha from Coding Room. See you next week.
See you.